I walked into my husband's office carrying flowers and 2 tickets to Paris, and 30 seconds later, I watched him get down on one knee in front of another woman. Not just any woman. Vanessa Brooks, his CEO. The woman whose name had been showing up on his phone at midnight. The woman he said was just demanding. The woman I had defended more than once when my sister told me, "Emily, nobody works that late that often." I stood just outside the glass doors of Carter Dynamics' executive floor, holding a bouquet of white roses and pale pink tulips like an idiot. Behind the reception desk, someone had hung red and silver Valentine's garland. There were cupcakes on the conference table, champagne in plastic flutes, and a big group of employees gathered near the windows overlooking downtown Austin. Then Daniel laughed. That laugh used to undo me. He was wearing the navy suit I bought him for our 10th anniversary, the one he said made him feel like somebody important. His hair was freshly trimmed, his shoes were polished, and in his hand was a small black velvet box. I remember thinking for one strange second maybe this was some kind of company joke. Then he turned toward Vanessa. She was standing there in a white silk blouse and red heels, one hand pressed against her chest, already crying like she knew exactly what was coming. Daniel dropped to one knee. The office went quiet. "Vanessa," he said, his voice shaking just enough to sound sincere, "you believed in me when nobody else did." That sentence hit harder than the ring. Because I had believed in him when we were eating frozen pizza in a rented duplex in Round Rock. I had believed in him when my grandfather's money kept our payroll alive. I had believed in him when I signed over daily control of the company so I could take care of my father after his stroke. Vanessa covered her mouth. Daniel opened the box. A diamond caught the afternoon light. "Will you marry me?" People clapped before she even answered. I don't remember dropping the flowers. I only remember looking down and seeing a few petals scattered across the polished floor. One older employee, Marcia from accounting, saw me first. Her face went white. Then Daniel looked up. For 1 second, we just stared at each other. No shouting, no scene, no dramatic slap. I turned around, walked back to the elevator, and pressed the button with a hand that would not stop shaking. As the doors closed, I heard someone whisper, "Oh my God, that's his wife." And that was the first time all day anyone in that office told the truth. The elevator doors slid shut before anyone could reach me. I stared at my reflection in the stainless steel wall. Mascara intact. Hair still perfect. Flowers gone. It felt strange what your brain notices after something impossible happens. By the time I reached the parking garage, my legs had started working again. I climbed into my Lexus RX, shut the door, and just sat there. Austin traffic hummed somewhere above me. My phone buzzed. Daniel. I let it ring. Then again. I turned the phone face down. For nearly 12 years I had always answered him. Not today. I started the engine but didn't drive away. Instead, I opened the Carter Dynamics shareholder portal on my iPad. My login still worked. Of course it did. I still owned 78% of the company. Most people didn't know that. Employees assumed Daniel had built Carter Dynamics. Investors thought Vanessa ran it. That was exactly how Daniel liked it. When my father suffered a massive stroke 2 years earlier, I stepped away from daily operations to care for him in Georgetown. Daniel insisted he could handle the business while I handled family. "You've carried this company long enough," he'd told me. "Let me carry it for a while." I believed him. I smiled bitterly. Funny how trust always sounds reasonable until you discover where it leads. I tapped another number. "Claire." My attorney answered immediately. "Emily, everything okay?" "No." She heard something in my voice because she stopped talking. "I need you at your office." Now. 25 minutes later, I was sitting across from Claire Morgan in her conference room overlooking Lady Bird Lake. She'd been my attorney since Carter Dynamics was a startup operating out of a converted warehouse. She pushed a bottle of water toward me. "What happened?" I took a slow breath. "I just watched my husband propose to another woman." Claire blinked once. "Are you absolutely certain?" I watched him kneel. She quietly removed her glasses. "I'm so sorry." "I don't need sympathy. What do you need?" I looked straight at her. "I want to know exactly what I still control." Within minutes, legal files covered the conference table. Operating agreements. Shareholder documents. Trust paperwork. Claire highlighted one page. "You still own 78%. "I know." "You also personally guaranteed the original investment." "I know." She looked at me carefully. "Emily, are you thinking about removing Daniel's delegated voting authority?" "Yes." She nodded slowly. "That's possible." And the joint accounts? We can freeze them today. The Paris trip? You can cancel it. I stared out the window. Somewhere across town, Daniel was probably explaining himself, maybe blaming me, maybe saying it wasn't what it looked like. Except it looked exactly like what it was. I pulled the 2 first-class tickets from my purse. Paris. We'd planned that trip for almost 6 months. I folded the envelope once, then again. Finally, I dropped it into Claire's office shredder. The machine swallowed everything without hesitation. Claire watched silently. Emily? I interrupted her. Call First Texas Private Bank? She raised an eyebrow. You've made your decision. I nodded. For the first time all day. Claire picked up the phone. As she dialed, my own phone began vibrating across the conference table. Daniel. Again. Claire didn't speak while the banker reviewed my accounts. She simply slid a yellow legal pad across the table and let me write. Freeze joint checking. Freeze joint savings. Remove Daniel's authorization. Suspend every shared credit line except the household utilities. Each line I signed felt heavier than the one before it. I never imagined I'd be sitting in a law office on Valentine's Day dismantling a marriage one financial document at a time. The call ended. The bank will complete everything within the hour, Claire said quietly. I nodded. What about the shares? She leaned back. Emily, that's a much bigger decision. I know. You aren't talking about selling a few thousand shares. No. She folded her hands. If you sell your controlling interest, Carter Dynamics will never be your company again. That sentence landed harder than I expected. Because she was right. I wasn't only walking away from Daniel. I was walking away from the company I'd built from a folding table in my garage 12 years earlier. I remembered writing code until 2 a.m, meeting investors who assumed Daniel was the founder because he was the one giving presentations, correcting them politely, then eventually stopping. It became easier to let him enjoy the spotlight. After all, we were married. His success was supposed to be ours. My phone vibrated again. Daniel. 23 missed calls. I declined it without listening. Claire waited. You don't have to decide today. I already decided. You have a buyer. I looked at her. You remember Redwood Capital? She nodded immediately. The private equity firm had approached me 3 different times over the last 4 years. Every time I'd refused. Not because the price was bad. Because Carter Dynamics wasn't for sale. Until now. Claire opened another file. I'll call them. They'll think this is a negotiation. Isn't it? No. I looked down at my wedding ring. It's an exit. At 4:42 p.m., Redwood's managing partner joined us on a secure video call from Dallas. His name was Michael Warren. Gray hair, navy blazer, no small talk. I honestly never expected to hear from you, Emily. I know. I assume something significant has happened. You could say that. He studied my face for a moment but didn't ask questions. That was one reason I respected him. He stayed in his lane. We're still interested in acquiring your controlling stake. I know. Our previous valuation remains valid. $560 million. He nodded. Subject to standard due diligence. Claire glanced at me. I could still walk away. Nobody was forcing me. Not Michael. Not Claire. Not even Daniel. This choice belonged entirely to me. I thought about the flowers lying somewhere on Carter Dynamics' executive floor. About Daniel kissing Vanessa while strangers applauded. About every year I'd believed marriage meant loyalty. Then I looked back at Michael. I'm ready. He didn't smile. He simply said, we'll start immediately. The paperwork began arriving within minutes. Electronic signatures, transfer authorizations, board notifications. Everything happened faster than I expected. At 5:11 p.m., I signed the final preliminary authorization. Claire slowly closed the folder. There. I let out a long breath. It's done. For the first time all afternoon, the room became completely quiet. Then my phone lit up again. This time it wasn't Daniel. It was the chairman of Carter Dynamics board. I answered. Before I could say hello, he spoke. Emily. His normally calm voice sounded shaken. What exactly did Daniel do? The board chairman, Richard Holloway, had been with Carter Dynamics longer than anyone except me. He was 72 years old, retired from Dell, and the kind of man who never raised his voice unless something was seriously wrong. What exactly did Daniel do? He asked again. I looked through the conference room window toward the Austin skyline. He proposed to Vanessa. Silence, then a slow exhale. I was afraid you'd say that. My head snapped up. You knew. No. But you suspected. I knew something wasn't right. Richard explained that over the past 6 months, Daniel had become increasingly secretive. Executive meetings were being held without proper notice. Large consulting contracts were approved without full board discussion. Vanessa frequently insisted certain decisions were operational matters that didn't require shareholder involvement. Richard hadn't liked it, but he also hadn't wanted to burden me while I was caring for my father. I thought I'd handle it quietly, he admitted. That was my mistake. It wasn't your marriage. No, he said softly, but it was your company. Those words stayed with me after the call ended. My company. For 2 years, I'd almost stopped thinking that way. I'd convinced myself stepping back was temporary, that Daniel was protecting what we'd built together. Instead, he'd slowly started acting as though the company belonged to him. Claire's assistant walked in with coffee. Neither of us touched it. A few minutes later, Claire returned from another phone call. Redwood has started its preliminary review. Already, they're moving fast. Good. She hesitated. There is something else. What? The market will hear rumors soon. I expected that. But Daniel won't. At exactly 5:38 p.m., my phone erupted, one notification after another. Daniel, Vanessa, our CFO, 3 board members, 2 investors, the head of human resources. Messages stacked so quickly I couldn't read them. Daniel left another voicemail. Emily, please answer. This isn't what you think. I almost laughed. There wasn't much room for misunderstanding after watching your husband kneel in front of another woman. Then another call came. This one from Carter Dynamics Chief Financial Officer Mark Ellis. I answered. Emily? Yes. Daniel just tried approving a financing package. So, he couldn't. I frowned. Why not? The system rejected his authorization. Claire looked at me. We both understood immediately. The bank had already removed Daniel's delegated authority from several corporate accounts tied directly to my ownership structure. Mark lowered his voice. He completely lost his temper. What happened? He demanded IT fix it. And they told him nothing was broken. I closed my eyes. For the first time that day, Daniel was beginning to understand something had changed. Not our marriage. His power. Mark continued. Vanessa looked confused. She didn't know. I don't think either of them understood how much of this company still depended on you. Neither had most employees. I had intentionally stayed out of interviews, press releases, and award ceremonies. Daniel enjoyed being the public face, and I preferred solving problems behind the scenes. That arrangement had worked until he forgot who had built the foundation beneath his success. At 5:47 p.m., another notification appeared. Doorbell camera motion detected. I opened the live feed. Daniel stood on my front porch. His tie was gone. His suit jacket hung over one shoulder. He wasn't angry. He looked terrified. Then he pressed the doorbell again. Daniel rang the bell 3 more times. Then he started knocking. Not pounding. Not screaming. Just steady, desperate knocks that echoed through the quiet neighborhood. I lived in a brick home in Westlake Hills about 15 minutes from downtown Austin. By 6 o'clock, most of my neighbors were walking their dogs or bringing trash cans back from the curb. The last thing I wanted was a front yard scene. Claire looked over my shoulder at the doorbell camera feed. Are you going to answer? I didn't respond. Daniel pulled out his phone. A second later, mine buzzed again. I let it ring. Then another voicemail appeared. Then another. Finally, I tapped the latest message. Emily, please, just open the door. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. His voice sounded different. Not guilty. Panicked. I muted the recording before it finished. Claire quietly asked, Do you want me to stay? Please. She nodded. Outside, Daniel sat down on my front steps. He buried his face in his hands. For a brief moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Then I remembered the applause. 20 minutes passed. He never stopped looking toward the front door. Eventually, he stood, straightened his shirt, and rang the bell one last time. This time, I opened the intercom connected to the doorbell camera. What do you want, Daniel? His head snapped up. Emily, thank God. What do you want? I need to explain. Go ahead. Not through a speaker. This is the only conversation you're getting. He looked around to make sure no neighbors were close enough to hear. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. I couldn't help it. I laughed. A short, tired laugh. Which part? The proposal. The kiss. Or forgetting you're already married. He closed his eyes. Vanessa doesn't know everything. I don't care what Vanessa knows. Emily, please. You humiliated me in front of our employees. It wasn't planned. I stared at the screen. That was the first lie he'd told that evening. Maybe the 10th if I counted the past 6 months. You had photographers there. His face fell. You had decorations. Silence. You had champagne. Still nothing. Finally, he whispered, I made a mistake. No. I leaned closer to the speaker. You made hundreds of decisions that led to today. He rubbed both hands across his face. Can we please talk inside? No. I'll lose everything. There it was. Not, I'll lose you. Not, I'm sorry. Not, I love you. Just, I'll lose everything. The words settled over me like cold rain. I realized he still didn't understand why I had walked away. He thought this was about money. It never had been. Go home, Daniel. I don't have anywhere else to go. I almost reminded him that Vanessa probably did. Instead, I simply disconnected the intercom. He stood there another 5 minutes before finally walking toward his car. I watched until he drove away. The house became quiet again. Claire placed a folder on the kitchen island. Redwood just sent another update. I opened it. Across the top in bold letters were the words, Preliminary Acquisition Accepted. Beneath that was a note from Michael Warren. Emily, before we move further, there's something in the original shareholder agreement you need to review. I don't think Daniel ever knew it existed. I looked up at Claire. What agreement? She was already reaching for the file cabinet. Claire unlocked the old fireproof cabinet beside her desk. I haven't looked at these in years, she said. She pulled out a thick binder with a faded label. Carter Dynamics, Original Formation Documents. I hadn't seen it since we outgrew our first office. Claire flipped through dozens of tabs before stopping at a document signed 12 years earlier. There! I leaned closer. My grandfather's agreement, she nodded. When Carter Dynamics was barely more than an idea, my grandfather had loaned us the first $2 million through our family investment company. Daniel and I couldn't qualify for a bank loan back then, so Grandpa Harold stepped in. He had one condition: never let anyone take this company away from you. At 23, I thought he was simply being protective. Now I realized he had been practical. Claire slid one page toward me. Read paragraph 12. I did. Then I read it again. If the founding shareholder holding a controlling interest permanently transferred ownership, every executive employment agreement created under that original governance structure automatically became subject to immediate board review and reapproval. I looked up. What does that actually mean? Claire smiled for the first time all afternoon. It means Daniel's executive protections disappear the moment your transfer closes. I blinked. His severance. Gone. Golden parachute. Gone. Guaranteed voting authority. Gone. She tapped the page. Everything tied to those protections has to be approved again by the board. I sat back in my chair. I honestly forgot this existed. So did everyone else, including Daniel. The next morning I woke after barely 3 hours of sleep. The house felt unusually quiet. No coffee brewing. No television in the background. No Daniel rushing around looking for car keys. I made toast I never ate. At 8:07 a.m., Richard Holloway called again. Good morning, he said. It doesn't sound like one. It isn't. What happened? The board met at 7. So early. We didn't have much choice. He paused. Daniel tried entering the executive suite this morning, and his access badge was denied. I frowned. I didn't authorize that. You didn't have to. Richard explained that once Redwood formally acknowledged its intent to purchase my controlling interest, several governance protocols activated automatically. Corporate security had restricted executive permissions until ownership questions were resolved. Daniel argued with security for nearly 20 minutes. Employees watched the entire thing. He demanded they call IT, Richard said. They did. What happened? They confirmed the system was functioning exactly as designed. I stared out my kitchen window. For years, Daniel had walked through those doors believing he belonged there. This morning, a plastic access card told a different story. Richard lowered his voice. Vanessa wasn't happy. Because she thought Daniel exaggerated his authority. I almost laughed. So did Daniel. Richard chuckled softly. It was the first hint of humor either of us had found in 24 hours. Then his tone became serious again. We're calling a full board meeting tomorrow. Am I expected to attend? I hope so. I don't know if I'm ready. You don't have to speak. What if Daniel does? He probably will. I looked at the folder lying on my dining room table. Everything was changing faster than I'd imagined. The company, the marriage, even the story people believed about who had built Carter Dynamics. Richard spoke one last sentence before hanging up. Emily, truth has a way of catching up with people. For the first time since Valentine's Day, I hoped he was right. Richard was right. Truth has a way of catching up with people. I just didn't expect it to arrive in my inbox the very next afternoon. At 2:14 p.m., while I was sitting at my kitchen table pretending to answer emails, a message appeared from an address I didn't recognize. Subject, you deserve to see this. No greeting. No signature. Just one sentence. I couldn't stay quiet anymore. Attached was a video file. Nearly 11 minutes long. I almost deleted it. Instead, I clicked play. The recording came from one of the security cameras inside Carter Dynamics' executive conference room. There was no audio at first, only timestamps. 3 weeks earlier, Daniel walked in carrying a folder. Vanessa followed a minute later. Then the sound kicked in. I already booked the photographer, Vanessa said. Daniel smiled. Good. She spread several papers across the conference table. What about decorations? HR can handle those. And the champagne? Catering confirmed. I stopped breathing. This wasn't spontaneous. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't even romantic. It was scheduled. Vanessa laughed. I still can't believe your wife won't be here. Daniel shrugged. Emily spends every Thursday with her dad. My stomach tightened. He hadn't guessed where I'd be. He had counted on it. Vanessa looked at the calendar. So Valentine's Day is perfect. Daniel nodded. The board meeting ends around 2. Employees will already be upstairs. Exactly. She smiled. It'll make great pictures. Great pictures. Not a proposal. A photo opportunity. The video continued. Vanessa asked, what if someone tells Emily? Daniel leaned back in his chair. They won't. How can you be sure? Because everyone thinks she already checked out. Those words hurt more than the proposal. Not because they were cruel. Because somewhere along the way I'd accidentally helped create that illusion. I had stepped back, stayed home, skipped interviews, skipped award dinners, skipped investor events. I wanted to care for my father. Daniel had quietly replaced my absence with his own version of history. The video ended. I sat there staring at my laptop, not crying, just still. My phone buzzed. It was Marcia from accounting, the same woman whose face had gone pale when she saw me outside the executive floor. I answered. Hi, Marcia. Her voice shook. I'm sorry. You don't owe me an apology. I should have called weeks ago. What do you mean? I knew something was wrong. She hesitated. I didn't know about the affair, but I knew they were hiding meetings. Why didn't you tell me? I kept thinking maybe I was imagining it. She sighed. And honestly, what? I was afraid I'd lose my job. I couldn't blame her. Most people protect their paycheck before someone else's marriage. I sent the video, she admitted quietly. I copied it before IT deleted the planning folder. I closed my eyes. Thank you. I don't know if it helps. It does. More than she realized. Because for the first time since Valentine's Day, I no longer questioned myself. There was no misunderstanding, no accident, no moment of weakness. Daniel had planned my humiliation with the same attention he once gave our business plans. Before hanging up, Marcia said something that stayed with me. The board called an emergency shareholders meeting for tomorrow morning. I know. Everyone's coming. So I've heard. She lowered her voice. Emily, yes, I think they're finally going to find out who really built Carter Dynamics. I looked once more at the paused video on my screen. Tomorrow wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about the truth finally walking into the room. The Carter Dynamics headquarters looked exactly the same as it had every other morning. The same glass entrance, the same polished concrete floors, the same coffee cart in the lobby, the same security guard who smiled at me every Monday for almost 10 years. Only this time the conversation stopped when I walked through the front doors. Nobody announced my arrival. Nobody had to. Heads turned one by one. A few employees smiled nervously. Others looked down at their phones pretending to be busy. Marcia walked over first. She hugged me without saying a word. Thank you, I whispered. She nodded. You ready? No. Good. I looked at her. The people who think they're ready usually aren't. Despite everything, I smiled. It was exactly the kind of practical advice she'd been giving me since the company had 12 employees and folding chairs. The shareholders' meeting was scheduled for 9 o'clock. By 8:45, nearly every senior manager had already taken a seat. Richard Holloway stood near the front, speaking quietly with the company's outside counsel. Vanessa sat alone. She wasn't wearing her engagement ring. Daniel walked in a minute later. He looked exhausted. Dark circles under his eyes. Same navy suit. Different man. The moment he saw me, he started walking in my direction. Emily. Richard stepped between us. Not now. Daniel stopped. I just need 5 minutes. You've had months. The room became very quiet. Daniel returned to his chair without another word. At exactly 9, Richard called the meeting to order. This special meeting concerns pending ownership changes and executive governance. Nobody interrupted. The company's attorney explained the proposed acquisition by Redwood Capital. Slides appeared on the large screen. Share structure, voting rights, regulatory approvals. Everything was calm, professional. Then came the question everyone had been waiting for. Richard looked directly at Daniel. When did you intend to inform your wife that you were engaged to Ms. Brooks? Daniel swallowed. It wasn't finalized. Several people exchanged glances. Richard didn't. You proposed. Daniel hesitated. Yes. You kissed her in front of employees. Yes. While still legally married. Silence. Vanessa shifted uncomfortably beside him. Daniel finally spoke. I was going to explain. Richard folded his hands. When? No answer. Tomorrow. Silence. Next week. Still nothing. The attorney quietly turned off the projector. Nobody cared about financial slides anymore. Richard continued. Mr. Carter, this board is less concerned about your personal life than your judgment. Daniel frowned. My judgment? You publicly created a situation exposing this company to reputational, legal, and governance risks. Daniel looked around the room. I made a personal mistake. Richard shook his head. No. This became a corporate problem the moment you turned company property into your engagement party. Several board members nodded. One investor leaned forward. I'd like to ask a question. Richard gestured politely. Go ahead. The investor looked at Daniel. Did you honestly believe the controlling shareholder would never find out? Daniel didn't answer. Because there wasn't one. Every person in that room already knew the truth. The only thing left was hearing it spoken aloud. Richard turned toward me. Emily, he smiled gently. If you'd like to address the board, the floor is yours. I stood up. The room became perfectly still. I stood slowly. No dramatic entrance. No prepared speech. Just me. For a second I looked around the room. People I'd hired. People I'd promoted. People I'd shared birthdays, late-night pizza product launches, and impossible deadlines with. Some couldn't meet my eyes. Others looked genuinely ashamed. I understood both. I won't keep you long, I said. My voice surprised even me. It was steady. I didn't come here to embarrass anyone. Nobody moved. I came because everyone deserves to hear the truth. I looked at Daniel. When Carter Dynamics started, we had one folding table. A few longtime employees smiled. We couldn't afford real office chairs. Someone quietly laughed. It was true. I wrote the first version of our software. I met with our first clients. My grandfather invested $2 million because no bank believed in us. I paused. Daniel worked incredibly hard. He looked up. I'll never deny that. The room stayed silent. He helped us grow. He traveled. He brought in customers. He sacrificed weekends. I wasn't interested in rewriting history. But building a company together doesn't give either of us permission to rewrite who built its foundation. Several heads nodded. I continued. 2 years ago, my father had a stroke. I stepped away because family mattered more than titles. I trusted my husband to protect what we'd built. I looked directly at Daniel. I never imagined I'd have to protect it from him. His shoulders dropped. For the first time, I saw something that looked like genuine shame. Not panic, not fear, just shame. He stood. Emily, I raised one hand. Please. To my surprise, he sat back down. I reached into my folder and held up a copy of the original shareholder agreement. This company wasn't taken away from Daniel. It wasn't taken away from Vanessa. It wasn't taken away by Redwood Capital. I laid the document on the table. It was handed away one decision at a time. Nobody spoke. I wasn't angry anymore. Just tired. The company's outside counsel cleared his throat. Ms. Carter Redwood Capital has completed its preliminary acquisition. I nodded. I know. Richard looked around the room. The board has also completed its review. He turned toward Daniel. Effective immediately, your executive employment agreement is terminated. The words echoed through the room. Nobody applauded. Nobody smiled. Daniel simply lowered his head. Then something unexpected happened. Vanessa reached into her purse. Without saying a word, she removed the engagement ring. She placed it gently on the conference table. I resign. Every eye in the room shifted toward her. She stood. I knew Daniel was separated. She looked at me. I didn't know he was still living with his wife. Daniel closed his eyes. Vanessa continued quietly. If I had known, I never would have said yes. Then she walked out. The room remained silent long after the door closed behind her. Richard finally looked back at me. Emily? For whatever it's worth. I'm sorry. I gave him a small smile. It wasn't your apology to make. As I gathered my papers, I realized something I hadn't expected. Watching Daniel lose everything didn't make me feel victorious. It simply made me realize I'd already lost enough. And somehow, that made walking away much easier. 6 months later, I finally made it to Paris. Not with Daniel. Just me. The flight felt strangely peaceful. I spent most of it reading a paperback novel I'd been carrying around for years but never opened. Somewhere over the Atlantic, I realized I hadn't checked my phone in almost 3 hours. That would have been impossible a year earlier. The city was exactly what I'd imagined. Early mornings along the Seine. Fresh bread from the neighborhood bakery. People sitting outside cafes without looking at their watches every 5 minutes. On my second afternoon, I walked into a small flower shop near the Luxembourg Gardens. The owner spoke enough English to help me choose a bouquet. White roses. My father's favorite. He had passed away 3 months after Valentine's Day. Before he died, he squeezed my hand and whispered something I'll never forget. You built something good. He wasn't talking about Carter dynamics. He was talking about the kind of person he hoped he'd raised. I carried the flowers to a quiet corner of the gardens and sat on a green metal chair for nearly an hour. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't replaying Daniel's proposal in my head. I wasn't thinking about board meetings, or lawyers, or contracts. I was simply present. Back in Texas, life had settled into a new rhythm. Redwood Capital kept most of the employees, something I'd quietly insisted on during the negotiations. Marcia was promoted to controller. Richard retired a few months later and spent more time with his grandchildren. As for me, I invested in a small software startup founded by 2 young women who reminded me of myself 12 years earlier. Not because I wanted another empire. Because I wanted someone else to get the chance I once had. Daniel wrote twice. The first letter was mostly apologies. The second was shorter. He admitted that somewhere along the way he had started believing his own publicity. Being called the face of the company had slowly convinced him he was the company. I read both letters. Then I folded them, placed them back in their envelopes and put them away. I never answered. Not because I hated him, because some conversations belong in the past. People sometimes ask whether I regret selling my shares. The honest answer is no. I miss the people. I miss the excitement of building something from nothing. But I don't miss waking up beside someone I could no longer trust. Looking back, the greatest loss wasn't my marriage. It would have been losing my self-respect to save it. Sometimes walking away isn't giving up. Sometimes it's the first honest step toward the life you deserve. If my story reminded you that dignity is worth protecting, I hope you'll carry that thought with you today. And if you've ever had to rebuild your life after someone broke your trust, thank you for spending this time with me. You're not alone.